There? Yes, okay, perfect. All right, hello everyone, thank you. Thank you for coming today. My name is Catherine Hanna. I'm one of the educational counselors with the Coptic Educational Foundation. Today I'll give a very brief overview of what parents can expect for middle school students all the way until ideally college, and how to get there and to be as sufficiently prepared as possible, because we recognize that preparation does not begin in high school, but it begins in middle school really, and even elementary, but middle school is really one of those pivotal points. So my name is Catherine Hanna. Sandy Gabriel is our other educational counselor. So both Sandy and I work together. If you have any questions or want to talk to us one-on-one, we're always happy to do that. I'll give a little background about myself. So I did my undergrad at UC Irvine. I double majored in psychology and social ecology. And then I went on to work for the Orange County Department of Education, really focusing on education and helping students get to college. And then I went and got my master's at UCLA in higher educational organizational change, where I was focusing more on practices and how to make college access more equitable, and what are the differences between those that get into great colleges and somewhat mediocre colleges, and how to come back and help my own community. And then I went on to work at USC, or University of Southern California. I was there for about 3.5 years, focusing in on admission practices. I would interview students who would get full ride scholarships, review those applications, as well as help advise them throughout undergrad and into graduate school. And before I left, I oversaw the graduate school advising office, so I have extensive experience with students applying to graduate school and what that looks like, and how to best prepare yourself. Like, mom and dad always say, oh, go be a doctor, but what does that actually look like in undergrad is very important as well. And then more recently now, I do work for a tech company, educational tech company. So I've shifted away a little bit from higher education in particular, but I still am very much involved in all of this and attend conferences and things like that. So I do stay on top of it, and that is why I'm also at the Coptic Educational Foundation. So just a quick agenda. I'll review some of the CEF services, and just show of hands, who has heard of the Coptic Educational Foundation? Yes. Okay, that's okay. I'll go over some of our services and our backstory. And then talking about Guide for Parents, middle school success, extracurricular activities, high school success, college, university pathways, college admission requirements, and then I'll briefly touch on financial aid if anyone's really interested. I know that's years away, but if you're interested, we can talk about it. And then, of course, any questions. And I do welcome any questions throughout the presentation. Please just raise your hand. I'm happy to answer them. So CEF, also known as the Coptic Educational Foundation, we've been around for about 20 years. It was founded by two brothers, Nabi and Sharif Yusuf, whose mission was really to ensure that our community has access to educational resources, especially for those that are just immigrating from Egypt, or those that were even raised here but are still trying to understand it. It's changing every year, college admission and just navigating that whole space. So we do provide support for newcomers, undocumented students. We do also offer some special education, college counseling. For high school students, we offer college admission and financial aid workshops. We offer workshops on personal statement, how to write your personal statement for college, because that's a big component right now. We do a lot of one-on-one counseling, so career counseling or college advising. And one of our things that we're most known for in the community is our Merit Achievement Scholarship Award. So we award 20 of those. They're worth $1,000 each, for 20 per year. And every year around the diocese, we go and give these scholarships to students. So that's definitely what we're known for. SAT, ACT prep, of course. And then for our college students and professionals, we also offer a graduate school scholarship that's worth $2,000, and we offer 5 of those a year for students that have been admitted to a graduate school. So think law school, master's, PhD, medical school, anything like that. And then, of course, job search, resume writing, interview tips, and graduate school admission workshops as well. So we really try to cover a range of students. We try to help anyone and everyone in any way that we can. So if there's anything here in particular that you would like more help on or more information on, I'm happy to go over that. Or we can always meet one-on-one and see what and how we can help you in particular. Okay, so see, these are some of the general topics, but I'm going to get into them, so I'll just go on here. So choosing a school. I think one thing that's very important is deciding whether or not you want to put your child in private or public school, and they do vary by district. It's hard for me to say that one is significantly better than the other, and the reason I say this is because there are some public schools that really offer a private school education, and there are some private schools that may not always be worth the money. So I would always recommend that you look very thoroughly at the schools, and if college is really your number one item that you want them to get into a good college, to get a really good education, you can look at several different websites, of course, and also look at the school, talk extensively to the school to make sure that it is indeed worth your money. And for public schools, in the event you are not in an ideal location or you want to put your student in a different public school, you could always apply for like school of choice. Some districts offer that, or transferring of districts. Sometimes even within the same district, you have a really great school and a not so great school. So you could also ask to be selected for like a lottery, things like that. But definitely there are options. You don't necessarily have to stay with the school that you are with. And some websites include californiasschooldashboard.org, greatschools.org, school profile, California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System. These are definitely some things that you may want to check out. And if you are interested in these websites, I can always send out this presentation thereafter too, so you don't have to necessarily write these down. So knowing the school, I see we have some students here. What are their ages or grades? 7th grade, okay. 7th? 5th, okay. And what about you? 8th, okay. All right, so parents, you might already know this, but for those that are live streaming, so knowing your school is really important, understanding the physical layout of the school, where's the main office located, school nurse, cafeteria, gym, playgrounds, things like this. I know it sounds very intuitive and you would know this, but truly understanding the landscape of a school is important. And of course, understanding the school website, where you can find information. I know growing up, at least my parents as immigrants didn't maybe ask the right questions that they wanted due to a language barrier, but I highly encourage, of course, to not let that serve as a barrier for you, because there's always a way to find that information. And I think one beautiful thing right now is that there are school websites. Back in the day, there were no school websites, so you can still find a lot of that information. School calendars, school profiles, staff and contact information, testing dates, extracurricular activities, and even now they give you access to their grades and homework assignments, so that's also really nice. So having access to all that information is going to be extremely helpful. So when thinking about public versus private, here are some key differences. Of course, public is free. You're paying that through your tax dollars every year. Private is not free. You are paying that out of pocket. For some parents, they may decide to use a 529 investment account to pay for this education. For others, they are paying solely out of their pocket. And in terms of the price, it does range. As you get older, the price does tend to increase. So from kindergarten private school to 11th, 10th grade private school, the tuition will increase. And because these systems are, one's bound by the government, one is not, because a public school is bound by the government, there is certain curriculum they must teach. On the other hand, a private school, they're not bound by the government, they're not asking for their money, so they can teach kind of how they want and what they want a little differently. So for instance, religious affiliation, right? A private school may be religiously affiliated, they have to take religious courses. Public school, that will never be the case because there's a separation between church and state, always. In terms of teachers, this is another big difference, is for a public system, a teacher must be certified or must have a certification in order to teach. At a private school, they don't require certification. However, these individuals, you may have a teacher who has a PhD, whereas at a public school, you may just have a teacher who has a bachelor's and a teaching certificate. But they are not bound to certification, so they may have different levels of education. And in some cases, this could be really beneficial because if a PhD person is teaching a research class at a private institution, they'll have a lot more experience versus a public school may or may not teach that class, and if they do, you may find yourself sometimes with the teacher teaching chemistry, biology, and physics. So admission and student body, of course, this is also going to look different. Public school, it's really open to the general public, people in the surrounding area that live there. So that is one thing. I will say also public schools do have more designated money to support special needs students and pay specialized teachers. Whereas privates may not do this. They do still offer those services, but it may look a little differently. So that's definitely something to consider if your student needs to take advantage of those resources. And then, of course, private schools are more selective in the sense that they do require the student to take an exam to see if they even want to admit the student. But on the other hand, classes tend to be smaller, so they do get a little more personalized education. Whereas at the public school, it's about 30 students in each classroom. All right, so sending your kids to school to learn. I'm sure parents do this already, but I think it's also important to highlight that maybe the students want to hear this, is always having a great nutritious breakfast, having good sleep. Having good sleep prepares you for the next day. So limiting our video games, our TVs, on the iPad, especially at night, because that blue light really does stimulate you a little more and makes it more difficult not only to sleep, but to get restful sleep. So that's going to be really important. And we know when you're sleeping, you're learning a lot more, you're able to be more energized. And also, you know, having them organized the night before, I think is really important. So for instance, if, you know, sometimes you're running late to school and child doesn't know what to wear or their lunch, maybe doing that the night before, having them organize what they're going to wear the night before, so come in the morning, they know exactly what they're going to do, and you're kind of out the door a little more smoother than feeling a little more frantic. Of course, having a calendar, I think, is really important, a visual for the student to see, okay, this is what I'm doing this day. Maybe I have soccer practice today, or I have this project due on this day. And even having them write it in, to have them have a little more agency and ownership in that. So personal planner, or whatever it may look like in how you organize their assignments and things like that. And then, yeah, I just really want to highlight sleep. I can't stress this one enough. So preteens, about 10 to 12 hours of sleep a night is ideal, and about teens, 8.5 to 9.5 hours is good. We don't want you running on like 6-7 hours of sleep. Sleep is definitely important. Sorry, this is a little not aligned correctly, but supporting homework expectations. So this is really, really important. I think a lot of parents do an amazing job of helping their students with their homework and walking them through it, which is great. But the biggest thing I want to stress too is that the teachers teach at school, but the parents still need to continue that teaching. It doesn't just end in the school. And to put that responsibility on one individual, one teacher is a lot, so parents taking ownership is really important. And just so you know, a general rule of thumb is 10 minutes per elementary grade level of homework. So if you have a 5th grader, you should expect about 50 minutes of homework a day, things like that. So avoiding distractions is going to be really important when you're sitting to do their homework with the student and helping them walk through it. Having a designated space or a clean space at least, even if it's just a small desk, but to have nothing on the desk so they're not distracted and they're more focused. I would even encourage for some students that are just really, really excited and want to do other things is maybe having a little timer. Hey, for 10 minutes, we're going to work on this. Once this timer's over, we're going to take a 3-minute break and then continue on. Because the student at that point has a goal in mind. They know, okay, in 10 minutes, I'm going to get a break, and then I can continue on. So having that's also important. I think in my own experience growing up, my parents were like, no, you got to stay and do it the whole time. And I know for me, at least, I was like, after a while, I was like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I'd fight with my parents. But I think, and that was because also, I think this advice, for instance, right, I think would have been helpful for me. So developing good work habits from the get-go, teaching them those habits, being a support system, if they have questions, trying to answer them. If you don't know the answer, that's okay. Let them know that you don't know the answer and that you're going to help them find an answer. But to keep supporting them, and when they do a good job, to tell them they did a good job, even if it's not 100%, maybe it's like 90% good or 80% good, still highlighting what they did well and what they could do better. Because that's really going to be important in building a student's self-esteem and self-confidence for them to do better later on. Homework problems. If you're noticing your student's not grasping a concept, don't wait for the report card to be the end-all be-all. Meaning, okay, on the report card it says they're not doing well, so we have a problem. If you notice that they're struggling with certain concepts, try to be proactive and get them the help that they need, because that can make the difference very well later on. Especially because when thinking about how they learn now and what they retain now will either get them ahead later or keep them a little stagnant. So this time is really critical. And of course, asking the teachers if you don't understand something, if they don't understand something, and finding ways in which you can help them. And of course, if you have the means, tutors. You can also hire private tutors as well. So teaching organizational skills. This is not an innate skill. This is not something we're born with. We're not born to be organized. Some parents are extremely organized and do it really, really well, but that doesn't mean that your child is going to be just as organized as you. So having an assignment book, as I mentioned, homework folder to keep track, and make sure that they also pick it up and they can communicate to you what they're doing. Because that's the most important thing. You want the students to be part of this experience, not you just telling them what to do all the time. Because this will make a big difference later on for them to own their own assignments, to own their grades and things like that. So of course, again, I know I already said this, but use a calendar, personal planner, whatever it looks like, or even a whiteboard, if that's what the student needs. But have them be involved in that process. Yes. That's a really great question. I think it's up to you and the student. If you feel like it's going to do more harm than good in terms of causing them more stress, then probably not, right? But I would also suggest, yeah, the one thing that I would suggest is if the school feels like they're ready for the challenge, maybe let them try it out, right? But also before you do that, consult with the school. Say, okay, I'm open to them, having a challenge, but in the event that we want to pull them back, what does that look like? Do they have to stay one semester and then the second semester we can move them back? Or if they put them there, they're stuck there, right? And then at that point, it's a decision you make. But I do think it's worth at least allowing them to challenge themselves and seeing how it works out. Of course, with your support. But if you notice it's becoming too much, you should always be able to go back a little. I know in high school it gets increasingly more difficult, and it is very stressful. But I still think it's worth at least allowing them to challenge themselves, check it out, see how they feel, check in on them, and don't. I think it's a tricky time too, where you don't want to put too much pressure to the point where they crack, but you also don't, if they can do it, why not, right? So I think just checking in with the students is going to be really important. Yeah. Mhm. Can I ask what grade right now you're thinking about? 7th, okay. So what I'll say to this is, the short answer is yes, it can make a difference, but how? So if a 7th grader right now is taking, I don't know, pre-algebra, 8th grade they take algebra. By the time they get into 9th grade, they're taking geometry, right? But in some cases, or maybe they even take geometry in 8th grade, by the time they get into 9th grade, they're taking algebra 2, which is great in the sense that they're definitely going to be ahead in math. And by the time of their senior year, they'll definitely be taking at least AP Calculus BC, or maybe even something further than that at a community college if they wanted to. Now in the reverse, if a student is barely taking Algebra 1 in the 9th grade, naturally they're probably not going to make it to calculus because they still have to take geometry, then they still have to take Algebra 2, and then they can finally take calculus if they're ready for it, or they may take trigonometry, or they may take statistics. So it definitely makes a difference. I will say most colleges at this point, especially like really competitive colleges, if you don't have at least calculus AB or BC, it's going to be really difficult to get in, especially if your major is in the sciences. If it's in the sciences, like you need to have an AP calculus. So that's the benefit. However, you definitely want to keep it at their pace because the last thing you want also is, okay, yeah, they're in this great AP calculus class, but they're not doing well. And then what happens then? It was kind of all for nothing, right? So that's how, just monitor like how your student's doing, checking in how they're feeling, how it's going. But I know it's a very tricky time. I've seen my own cousins who just went to college this year and how stressed she was the last couple of years with it. But that's the main difference, is what I'd say, and that's why we would encourage them to kind of hone in on that math, because it's really math is the one that has like a sequence, whereas like science, they're going to take all the sciences. English, they're going to take English for 4 years, things like that. But the math is the one where it has a sequence and it has an effect. Yeah. There's AB and BC. So there's like part 1 of calc, or calc 1 is AB, and calc 2 is BC. Yeah. Highly encouraged to try to take both, but of course if you could at least take one, that's good too. Knowing disciplinary policies, so of course, this is just a general rule. I won't spend too much time on this, but of course, if expectations are not being met or student behavior, what does that actually look like? So thinking about the details for, attendance, vandalism, cheating, so on and so forth. And knowing that the school can definitely call the police if needed. One thing I will also mention, it's not here, but attendance. There is a rule in the state of California, it's like called truancy, where if you miss, I don't know if it's 12 days or I forgot the exact number, but if you miss a certain amount of days, the school will call you in to tell you, hey, kid's not coming to school, what's wrong? And it could turn into it could get escalated if you don't watch that. So just something to keep in mind. Of course, here it is. So yeah, taking attendance seriously. Of course, it affects other things like lower grades, difficulty on assignments, issues with classmates or teachers, social problems. So trying to keep them in school as much as possible and only letting them skip if there's a reasonable reason. I've seen families sometimes, they're like, well, I want to take a vacation in February and they're going to miss 12 days of school. It's probably not ideal. You'll kind of want to wait for their breaks to do that. All right, after school programs. So some districts do offer this, where you can go ahead and leave your student at the after school program, which is a great alternative if you don't want them necessarily watching TV, or maybe you're still working and you need someone to be with them for the next couple hours. But this is a great place where they can further develop their interests, their talents, allows them to meet other individuals, develop those social skills. So that's kind of the benefits of those after-school programs. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. So keeping in mind what you want to do with the student there. And then home alone. Some students have to stay home alone, and that's okay too, but just specifying, making sure that they don't open the doors for strangers, and you let them know when you'll be home and have that expectation. I know this is pretty rare, but in the instances in which you have to leave the student home alone. Okay. So some screen time guidelines. I know this can be, especially now as this generation has lived only through computers and iPads and things like that. So some general guidelines here is just, of course, keeping in mind that there should be a separation between, seeing this as a tool for either educational tool or an enjoyment tool, but having them understand, hey, this time is for homework and this is how we'll utilize this, and being firm if needed, right? Hey, you don't get to use your iPad for 2 days because of X, Y, and Z. Ideally, especially the older ones, not having it on during the times of meals, or at least 1 hour before bedtime, to have that separation between when and when not to use this, the tools. And, I think, yeah, so I'll just kind of leave it at that. And of course, one thing that we don't necessarily sometimes think, but it can contribute to obesity, attention and learning problems, and sleep problems if it's not well monitored. Why? Because their focus is on this. They're more so looking for this as, fun tool, and like all the things I mentioned about sleep. The light can alter their sleep. And just having time limits, maybe like 2 hours, or 2 hours might be a lot, an hour or so, yes. That's a really good question. Personally, what I would suggest is still having something educational for him to reinforce those ideas. Because there's also, sometimes we finish something to finish it and we're done, but did we really learn it can be another thing. So I would still probably encourage, hey, maybe 30 minutes. I know you're done, but 30 minutes of just reading this, and then have them explain to you what they read. Did they actually understand it, right? And maybe ask them a question, or tell them to ask you a question about it to see if they really understood it. And then giving them the time, of course, to be on the video games or whatever, right? They're still children at the end of the day. But I do think having that progress check is going to be important and holds them accountable to actually learning it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, weekends are a little different. It really depends. I do think when they're really, really young, you don't want to give them too much. And when they get a little older, they naturally probably won't have as much time because they're focused on AP classes. But on a daily basis, maybe an hour is something you want to limit it to. Hopefully we're not going much more than that. Maybe 2 hours, depending on, if you're on spring break or something like that. That can look a little different, that schedule. But ideally not 5 hours a day or 4 hours a day. That's just too much, I think. So I would limit it in that sense, and while still holding them accountable. You're welcome. So IEP programs. So for individuals that need to take advantage of these resources, the biggest piece of advice I'd give is take advantage of them sooner rather than later, because it could really make a difference in your child's educational journey. So of course, consulting with doctors and consulting with the school and whatever it may look like, but to be open to them taking advantage of these resources is really, really important. So it can range from, ADHD, emotional disorders, autism, hearing impairment, visual impairment. Just make sure you're working alongside with the school to get what your student needs. And I will also say, be an advocate for your student. If you really feel like there's something that they need and the school is not giving it to you right away, fight for your student and let them know that, this is what you need, because the schools have the resources to do it. Sometimes they may just be a little hesitant to give them, but that's where you as a parent can advocate for them. All right. So just to kind of recap some keys to success for middle school: sleeping well. I know I've been talking about that one. Eating well, eating balanced meals, not just sugary cereals, but maybe some chicken and some broccoli. Maybe you don't like broccoli, but some vegetables of some sort, right? Completing your homework on time and actually understanding it. Being involved is really important for the students, so having them involved in sports or after-school clubs is going to be important in them building their self-esteem, their self-confidence, to make new friends, to just help them inside and outside of school. Asking for help, both parents and students can do this, so please don't ever hesitate. I know your teachers are really busy, but your child is your child, and you want to advocate for them. You want to ask those questions and get the answers that you need. Staying organized, I know I mentioned that. And lastly, making SMART goals. So having you and your child together making those SMART goals. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So, for instance, I plan to get an 85% or higher on my math exam by studying 2 hours a day for the next 3 weeks, Monday through Friday, right? It's specific, we can measure it, 85%. It's attainable because we're going to study. It's relevant to the grade, and it's time-based because we're going to do it 2 hours a day for the next 3 weeks. So as long as it hits all those things, it makes it a lot easier to achieve. Yes, question? That's a good question. I think it depends on the reasoning, right? What's motivating it? Is it because the school is better? You want to go to a better school? Is it because they have more opportunities that make sense to you in terms of extracurriculars or the classes that they teach? Okay. So I think, having your friends is important and it's nice, but I would go back to those factors, right? Is it a better district? Am I going to have access to better classes? Also, same level. Okay, then in that case, it could be an option. I think the other item to think about is how far is the school, right? Because if it's going to add, 20, 30 minutes to your commute, parents, that's a lot, right? So I think that's something we just have to consider. But I will leave it up to you and your parents to decide. But I acknowledge the distance. All right, so extracurricular activities, yes. Is it easy? Depends on the district. Some districts will make you apply for what's called school of choice, because I know every house has one elementary, one middle school, one high school. So you can apply for, and you may need to do this through the district. I would look at the district's website, how to apply for school of choice to see how you can transfer your student. I know in some cases you could even call the school and just ask them, hey, do you have space for 5th grade, whatever it may be. So they may be willing to say yes, and this is a process in which you can transfer over. But the short answer, is it easy? It depends. It depends on the rules of the district. It depends on the rules of the school. So you just have to go through the district to do that. But it's something to definitely check out. You're not limited necessarily to what you have. Yeah. All right, so extracurricular activities. These are really, really important in the sense that these are times in which your student can develop their interests, develop their personality, develop their leadership skills, develop their interests in terms of what that can turn into, of how they maybe get involved in other items later on, which can very well turn into those extracurricular activities that'll make you stand out in college. So having your student participate in anything, and an extracurricular activity is defined as something that is not, it doesn't have to be associated with the school, it can be, but anything they're doing outside of the classroom. So sports, being part of the church youth, things like that are extracurricular activities. So as I mentioned, it's important to identify what their interests are. Do they like to talk a lot? Do they like public speaking? Do they like problem solving? Maybe finding a club in middle school or high school that promotes those skills, that helps them hone in on it. So speech and debate, if they like public speaking and maybe problem solving. Are they very business savvy? Maybe there's a business leadership club at their school. Do they like computers and programming? Maybe a robotics club or a programming club. Allow them to be in those spaces where they can grow and develop those interests. Because as I mentioned, those can turn into leadership positions, help them take more classes because they're more prepared to learn a little more deeply, and which in turn ultimately turns into those extracurricular activities that we like for college applications. So the importance is, if you don't have a lot of extracurricular activities, colleges are probably not going to admit you. And when I say a lot can look different. A lot can be maybe 2 or 3 activities that they're heavily invested in, or deeply invested in, where they've gained leadership positions, or they've had an impact in these services. So having them just be involved is going to be really important. Getting them involved sooner rather than later makes a world of a difference. And I will say that colleges are looking to admit someone who's going to have an impact. So someone who's only been going to school and going home, unfortunately, is not someone that we think may have the very biggest impact in the world, because they're limited to just their home and school, right? So we want to see someone who's gone above and beyond, and I'll give you some examples. I had a student once, this was during COVID, and she was in high school, but one thing that she really wanted to do was she couldn't see her grandma. So as a result, she was like, there are a bunch of other senior citizens who can't see their family and their loved ones. So her and her friend went ahead and created this, it's called Sweets for Seniors, where they made these baked goods and these handwritten notes, or they packed what were already baked goods, and they wrote handwritten notes and dropped them off at senior citizen centers, right? This has nothing to do with the school, but this was something of the individual who, and even her past extracurriculars, was very much involved in giving back, helping others. So this just seemed like a natural extension for her, a natural next step, and something that she did. And then after a while, because her and her friend only had so much money to do this, they went around to local grocery stores who would donate tools or donate money, and then even in their communities, people started to donate. So when they first started, I think they reached like 30 seniors, and by the end of it, they had given away almost like 700 senior packages. That was very impactful. That was very important. It shows leadership, it shows passion, it shows impact. Those are all the things we're looking for in students. But again, as I mentioned, that individual had a deep passion in helping others, and her other extracurriculars kind of showed for that. So her taking that step and creating that was her initiating something based off she already loved. So developing those interests. So as I mentioned, leadership, passion, impact, those are the things that make you stand out. And to be a leader, you do not have to be the president of the club, you do not have to be the vice president, you can just be someone who has taken initiative to create something new, or to say, hey, we have all these resources, why don't we do this with it? So some things to keep in mind when thinking about leadership roles. And here are some examples of clubs that are associated with relevant topics: social activism, technology, volunteer, sports. There are many, many things that they can get involved in. And even students can get involved in things that are part of the school or part of their community. So you can even check in your local city. They may have certain clubs and organizations that they can be involved in. So they're not limited to what the school has. And here are some other ones as well. Yeah, in middle school they do have actually a lot of clubs, so I would get involved in those. I will say middle school, they don't have nearly as many, but some that come to mind, like Associated Student Body or ASB, that's one, that's a leadership one. Excuse me. I've seen like a Spanish club before. Excuse me. I've seen even like a Kids Helping Kids club before, things like that. So I would definitely check with your local middle school too. So these are other ways in which you can get involved, of course. Church is one, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, family business, athletics, clubs, part-time work, things like that. All right, so preparing for high school. This is the biggest one. This is going to be just a high-level overview of what to expect, but for the next 4 years. Excuse me. So 9th grade, parents meet. If not you, your student needs to meet with their counselor right off the bat and try to start designing the 4-year plan as much as possible. And the reason why this is important is because you don't want your student taking a class that isn't going to benefit them. That happens sometimes. Not often, and it's okay if it happens the first year, but if we can avoid it, why not? And I will say 9th grade is the year in which your grades matter, but they don't matter nearly as much as 10th and 11th grade. So it's okay if 9th grade is a little shaky. We acknowledge the transition from middle school to 9th grade can be tough and can affect your grades. So thinking of the A through G guide, which are the classes that they must take in order to be eligible to be considered for college admission. If you don't complete the A through G guide, you won't be eligible to be considered. It doesn't mean admission is guaranteed, it just means you'll be considered. Exploring those extracurricular involvement is 9th grade. And then 10th grade, again, grades really start to matter here. Trying to take honors by 10th grade if they can. If they're eligible to take honors in 9th grade, let them take that. But typically most schools won't allow until 10th grade to take honors in AP. Continuing their involvement in whatever extracurriculars they've started. And even 9th grade, they can explore, let's say they try out for like 8 different things. By the time 10th grade comes around, limiting it to 2 or 3, that's okay. Preparing for SAT, ACT if they're going to take it, and exploring college campuses. And then for 11th grade, taking on academic challenges and pursuing leadership opportunities. Take those exams and start to write your college essay if possible. I know that's pretty early, but it definitely makes a difference. So touring campuses, again, is important, and even research shows those at 4 campuses are more likely to pursue and persist to try to get there because they see it, they're like, I want to be here. So there is actually significant research that shows that. And then confirming A through G, making sure we've taken the classes that we've needed. And by the time 12th grade comes around, they're applying in September, October, November, continuing to do well, meeting provisional of admission, filing for FAFSA, and applying for scholarships. So what is A through G? What is A through G? So A through G, minimum 2 years of history, social science, minimum 4 years, or all 4 years of English, 3 years of math. However, I'd recommend at least all 4, and minimum completing Algebra 2 is the minimum you need to be eligible for colleges. So not Algebra 1, not geometry, those don't actually count. Laboratory science, minimum 2 years, I recommend 3. Language other than English, minimum 2, I would also recommend 3. Visual and performing arts, at least 1 year, and then college prep electives, at least 2 years. So, as you can see, there's a minimum requirement, but the minimum, to be quite frank with you, is not enough anymore. You need to go above and beyond. And the ones that I will stress that like we really, really need you to go above and beyond, math and science is gonna be super important. If the language, if you only take 2 years, that's okay, but just some things to keep in mind. And also one more thing, for the UCs, if you're thinking UCLA, UC Riverside, UC Irvine schools, they need to complete 11 out of the 15 before the end of their junior year. They will do so as long as they're not behind. So you don't need to worry about it too much, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. For the Cal States, it doesn't matter if they have the 11 done by the end of the junior year, as long as they get all 15 done. All right, so pathways to college. There are 3 ways we can get to college. The most traditional way is from high school to 4-year university. Another one is high school to community college to 4-year university. And the last one is taking the 11th grade CHESP, or the California High School Proficiency Exam, then going to community college, then going to a 4-year university. And then the 4 years, we have what's called public schools and private schools, just like we do have, K through 12. So public schools are your Cal States and your UCs. And then your private schools are like USC, Stanford, Pomona College. And within privates, we also have our Ivy League schools as well. Has anyone heard of the California High School Proficiency Exam? Yeah, okay. I don't know if anyone's considering it, but I'll give you a very high, you're considering it? Okay, I'll give you a very high level overview of it. So the purpose of this exam, it's gonna test you up to only 10th grade level of English and math, that's it, of what the state standard is. So if you pass this exam, you don't have to go to high school in California anymore. In theory, you are done, you've met the requirement of the state, and you can go on, for instance, and work without a worker's permit because you have what's equivalent to a high school diploma. But of course, by the end of 10th grade, you are not ready to go to a university. So if you decide to take this route, you would have to go to the community college, as I kind of showed here, right? CHESP to community college to 4-year. So the reasons why someone might take it. I've seen situations in which student recently immigrated from Egypt, wasn't acclimating very well, was having a very difficult time with people, and it was best for her to leave the school. She took this exam, finished, and went off to do her own thing. That makes a lot of sense. If you're trying to think, oh, if I leave early and start college earlier, I'm gonna graduate 2 years earlier, and then I'm gonna save 2 years in medical school, which is a very common route in which a lot of people think. In some cases, you actually don't save time. So I would really think about why you're taking this and what the motivation is. And I'm happy to talk to people one-on-one because I think everyone has a different situation. There is no perfect yes or no. So I would say it depends on your background and your motivation to take it. Typically though, I will say I am on the side of, I err on don't take it if you don't have to. But again, everyone's different. So some pros, as I mentioned, you graduate early, you have work opportunities, you don't have to take the SAT, you don't have to fulfill your A through G requirements, and you can do what's called transfer admission guarantee for a 4-year university from community college. The cons, of course, is, one thing to think about is, you're 16, are you mature enough to take classes at the community college with people that are 18 to like 60 years old, right? You're working in group projects with these people. Are you ready to leave behind all the social aspects of high school? Because now you're no longer a high school student, you can't engage in a lot of those activities anymore because you're not part of that school. And your academic performance too could take a toll in some cases. And then long-term impacts, speaking really of the medical school example, or any like graduate school example, is, for instance, in medical school, some medical schools require you to take math and science classes at a four-year university, right? Like these elementary introductory courses. If you're taking them at the community college because you had to, because you couldn't go to a four-year, some of those medical schools will not accept that. So you'll still transfer, but you'll have to retake those classes. So you're still wasting time, you're still paying extra for that because some of those medical schools do not accept it. So really think of your long-term plan, like sit with your student, think of the long-term plan before you take the plunge either way. The good news is though, you can take the exam and decide to stay in high school, even if you pass. You don't have to leave. It's totally up to you. In terms of cost though, $162 to $212 depending on when you register for it. And exams about 3.5 hours. It's only offered 3 times a year though. Yes. It still has the same impact. So it still has the same impact whether you take the CHESP and go to community college or you graduate high school and go to community college. But the reason I highlight it for this is because some people's motivation is solely to save time when in fact they may not be saving any time. But in terms of the transfer admission guarantee, this is true, that can apply to anyone who goes to community college. So if you take the CHESP or if you go straight out of high school, and I can just touch briefly on that, but essentially it's called TAG for short. And yes, if you complete all requirements at the community college within a specific amount of time and have a specific GPA, you can apply to guaranteed admission to one UC. The only caveat there is every single UC participates except UCLA, UC Berkeley, and UC San Diego. So, like UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, all those other schools do participate in that, but those 3 do not. So just a caveat there. Yeah. I will say if that's an option you're taking, my best advice is be part of the honors program at the community college. That's like an unofficial ticket into those schools because they prioritize those individuals. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for those, and I'm happy to talk to your student once they're at that point, but I think keeping an open mind that the subjects your student takes in high school are the most competitive subjects to apply in college. Biology, very competitive. Math majors can be really competitive. Psychology, really competitive. And these are things they're taking in high school, right? So naturally when students apply to college, they're applying to subjects they know, which make it increasingly difficult for them to get in because just so many people are applying. So the biggest thing I would suggest too is start to look at the majors within the colleges and read about them, understand them a little more because maybe yes, biology, oh, that's what I know, that's what I've taken, but maybe they're more interested in microbiology and there's a major in that. Maybe apply to that instead. Or biochemistry instead, right? So there's other things they could apply to. So in terms of picking a major and picking a career, I think taking time when they're in 11th grade to look at colleges and their majors, because colleges offer hundreds of majors. But in high school, you take 6 subjects really, maybe 6 to 10 subjects at best, right? So thinking about what else there is something that you want to sit and do, and then also looking, there's a website, I think it's bls.gov, but you can see like specific careers and what majors are associated with it. And that gives you an idea of, oh, okay, there's thousands of careers out there too, right? So also looking at that and making a match with the major can be really helpful. And in some cases, the reality is, like, when I used to work at the university, I had kids changing their majors all the time. And that's normal too, because they don't understand the choices they have until they get there. But as parents, because you know this, you can have them be proactive when they're in high school to explore those majors. So that's the advantage you have right now. Does that answer your question though? Kinda? Yeah, okay. All right, so college admission requirements. So in terms of what colleges require, so your academic qualities, A through G classes, the transcripts, the grades that you've received, right? SAT, ACT scores apply to some schools, not all. Cal States and UCs are no longer requiring it, but private schools still make it optional, and some are making it mandatory again. So those are your academic qualities. Now your personal qualities is another thing that we also evaluate. So specifically your extracurricular activities, what you've been involved in, what your impact has been. Personal statements. For private schools, they will require letters of recommendation specifically from a college counselor or a teacher, and in some of cases, they may also require an interview or a resume. And this is very specific, for instance, like architecture or film, art, things like that. They may require the students to submit a portfolio, but this is very rare. So anyway, two types of things we're evaluating you. Academically, but also who you are as an individual and what makes you different. Academically, everyone's gonna have a number, right? 3.5 GPA, 4.0 GPA, but your personal qualities will vary from student to student, and this is what colleges are definitely placing more emphasis on now, because everyone has a different life situation, everyone has different access to certain things, so trying to understand your motivations and why you do certain things is something that's really important to the colleges. So don't underestimate the impact of the personal statement and the extracurricular activities. They have a big impact right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I can actually. So first and foremost, there's a couple ways. So one big thing is some colleges they have designated counselors or admission officers that have a specific area. So for instance, there's someone who owns certain parts of Orange County, Newport and Irvine. They know the schools in and out, they know what the school offers, they know the average grades, they know on average where the students from these schools are going. They have all this information, so it's called a school profile. And you can look it up too, you could look up your student's high school profile. But college admission officers have very in-depth knowledge of what those schools offer and where their students are going. So that's one thing. So they already kind of have that piece, and they're looking at those students to see, okay, are they a good match for our school or not? So that's one advantage, that every school district has a designated admission officer. In terms of filtering though, so they have their pile, they may start to filter for, in some cases, GPA if it's really, really low. And really, is it in alignment with the school's GPA, average GPA, and the major's GPA? It's okay if you're below. It's okay. There's definitely a range. An average is an average for a reason. There's always people below that are getting in and admitted. But those are the grades that they're looking at. And then the second piece, which is really the most important at this point, are your personal statements and your extracurricular activities. And I'll give you an example here. I had a student who lived in a very low-income part of Los Angeles, but he would commute to a high school in Pacific Palisades every day, taking the train and the bus, and he did that to try to get access to better opportunities. Now, he's going to a high school with very privileged individuals, so naturally it's like, oh, well, you were privileged, you had all these access to all these resources and things like that, but him in particular, he did not. How do we know all this? His personal statement, the personal information he shared. So we use that, and we see him, we're like, okay, you had access to these things, but your situation was different. So we take that into consideration. So it's hard to say is there a filtering process, because the reality is understanding a student's background and life situation and motivations for doing things is something that can make or break it. And I've seen cases where they had interesting life stories, and some not like, terrible life stories, but really interesting things that happened to them, and their grades may have not reflected that, but they still got in. Why? Because we're looking, okay, this person is motivated. This person is resilient. This person is intuitive. This person is, creative in ways they find solutions, right? They don't let a roadblock limit them completely. So despite them not having the best grades, that was something we looked for. On the other hand, there are individuals with great, great grades, but they don't have anything to show in their extracurriculars. that's not a person we really want either. So to answer your question, it's hard. There's no like simple like, oh, if you have a 4.0, you know you're in. It doesn't work that way anymore. So that's why I say don't underestimate the importance of the extracurriculars and the personal statement and what you share and how you share it. Because the reality is that's you advocating for yourself in your own way. So that's why I stress extracurricular activities as early on as 7th grade, 8th grade, to really have them know what they like and be very heavily invested and involved in it. Because it makes a world of a difference. I wish I could give you a simple formula, but the way things are moving, there's not, and I think it's a good thing though. I think it's a good thing. Because it's not enough that someone has a great grades and then they come to college and they just stay in their dorm room all day. You know, colleges always see it as like, okay, is this person gonna go on and carry the name of this institution in a positive way? Are they gonna have an impact in a positive way? Or are they just gonna be someone who didn't do a whole lot, right? There will always be people like that, but colleges get inspired by that. So grades alone don't equal like impact, right? So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So something that comes to mind, have you heard of like Oxford Academy? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So there are a couple ways you can look at this, honestly. There's a situation in which those schools are very stressful. They can really impact the student. And I will say when a college admission advisor is reviewing their application, they acknowledge, okay, they went to this really rigorous school, they challenged themselves, even though they weren't, top. They're maybe average, but they still challenge themselves. On the other hand, there's a world where that same person can go to a school that's not as well resourced, but be the top person, right? And that stands out. What I will say is kind of the caveat here is they will know your background, your family background, in the sense of, are you high income? If you're high income and then they see you took your child to a school that's more lower income and out of the district, they will see that and they catch that pattern. Whereas if that is your home school and your child decides to go there, that's a different thing, right? In terms of the stress, though, that's the biggest thing I think we have to consider, because the stress is not going to end in high school, and college is going to get even more, right? So, because I've seen this in many cases, it can go one of two ways. It's really up to like, is your child prepared to take it on? Also, if they go to that school for a year and they don't like it, you can always pull them out and send them to another school. When it comes time for your student to apply to college, they can write about it in their personal statement. They can talk about why they left to give us understanding and context about their situation. And I'm always with the mindset of like, it's okay, let's challenge you a little bit, but if it doesn't work out after the first year, change direction. Because as I mentioned too, your first year is the year that they worry the least about your grades too. They don't make that be your end all be all, right? So if that's an opportunity that presents itself, I would take advantage of it in that way and then check in after that year to see if you need to move them. But in terms of like, yeah, because I think the biggest question here too is like, well, if they go to this high school's known to get them into these top schools, so I want them to get in there. But I've also seen situations where a student goes to those top schools and because they were average or like below average, even though they're incredibly smart, but in that school they're like average, below average, they don't get into the best colleges because of where they rank, yeah. But it also goes back down, in my opinion, because what I've seen too is those kids didn't have great extracurricular activities because they were so busy worried about their grades in school, right? So that's why that average, below average student at a very top high school still got into like, not even bad schools, but like UC San Diego, right? They didn't get into UCLA like all their other top classmates, or UC Berkeley or Princeton or Yale, whatever. So to them, they don't feel that great. But again, those individuals also maybe didn't have the best extracurriculars activities as well. So I don't have a straight answer for you, and I wish I did, but it depends on the student, and I would just do those check-ins. And I'm happy to talk to after a year if they do that, and then to see what the direction is and where they're headed, because it really does vary from student to student and what they're doing outside of class too.
Do colleges look if they're like
And avid in being in middle school, right? Or high school too. Yeah, they look at that. That's an extracurricular activity that you can add to your list that they'll look at. Yeah, they definitely look at that. Again, anything outside of the classroom is considered an extracurricular activity. I don't know if any parents here have high school students, but biggest piece of advice is if you have a high school student or the minute your student starts high school, create like a Google document or any Word document where they track every single thing they've done outside of the classroom. What they did, who they helped, whether it was someone else or themselves, and what was the impact on them. The reason I encourage this is because come time for 12th grade when they're applying to colleges, I've had so many students come to me like, oh, I didn't do anything. I did only this. And I'm like, okay, and then we start to talk a little more, like, oh, I did this in 9th grade, and I did do that in 10th grade in the summer. And I'm like, these are all things we need to include, right? So it's harder to remember what you did, but when you write it down, it's easier for them to recall that, because that makes a difference. And also, again, anything outside the classroom. You're babysitting your little sister and brother, that's an extracurricular activity. If you're a deacon in the church, that's an extracurricular activity. If you're taking care of grandma, that's an extracurricular activity. I know like little simple things like that still matter because it gives us context into your day-to-day life and maybe why you didn't take advantage of other activities, which is important for us to know. So it depends. I think you'll have up to 20 items that you can include for like the UC application. So I would still, yeah, you have up to 20. So I would still include all that. I think it's important to know because it definitely gives us, again, more context about the individual and understanding them. And it's like, oh, great, you were in part of these clubs, but you also had these other responsibilities. All right, brief overview of differences between public and private. So public system, we do have the Cal States. It is actually the largest public four-year university system in the nation, located in large and small cities and approximately, I think it's about $7K now, actually, tuition. So throughout the state of California, there are 23 campuses, and a lot of them are local, which is why these schools are considered more commuter schools, where students live at home and then commute to school. So I think ultimately what it comes down to is how your student prepares outside of that. One key difference between a UC and a Cal State is UC's focus on research. And as a result, they offer research opportunities. So just so you know, the professors at a UC, part-time, they're teaching in a classroom. The other time, they're researching in a lab, creating other work. So at a UC, if I go to a UC, I have access to work as a research assistant. Whereas Cal State's focus more on preparing you for a job thereafter. And the professors that teach at a Cal State oftentimes are not conducting research, they're just teaching, or they're working in the industry. So that's one thing that I think is a benefit for a UC, but doesn't mean that you can't get into medical school after a Cal State. So in short, what I would highly suggest is, it's fine to go to a Cal State, you can still get into medical school, I know plenty of people that have, but what are you doing outside of the classroom? You have clinical rotations. Are you volunteering in hospitals? Are you finding ways to get involved in research? Are you doing summer externships at other universities to get involved in different research opportunities? These are the things that are going to make you stand out. And I do think sometimes at a Cal State you may have to work a little bit harder because those opportunities are not readily available there. So that's a difference, but it doesn't mean you can't get in. You can still get in. Oh yes, very, very, extremely important. In medical school in general right now, MCAT obviously very important, which is the exam they have to take. Their extracurriculars outside of the classroom is extremely important. How many hours they've put in, where they've put in. Their grades, of course, matter in terms of the required classes as well as your major classes. School ranking is something they do consider, but it's not the end-all be-all. More and more schools are looking to become more diverse, so they're not necessarily only admitting from top colleges, which is what we've seen historically, like many years ago. They're admitting from a range of schools. So those are some of the things. And also just with medical school, I think one thing to keep in mind is 10, 15 years ago, we saw a lot of students going from college to medical school. Now, it's not that easy. Now we're typically seeing students at least having 2 to 3 years between undergrad and medical school. Why? It's just very competitive. And naturally, a person who has some work experience in a hospital or something like that is more attractive than someone just coming out of undergrad. So if your student's in that situation, I just say don't feel any one way about it, because it's just kind of the nature of the landscape right now. Okay, so UCs. There are 9 of them, and they are known for their world-class public university system, known for its premier academics, selectivity, and research, located in much larger cities. So this is where we tend to see students moving away to college, right? They don't necessarily live right next door to the school. An average tuition is about $14,000 a year. Maybe 15 now, but around there. All right, so quick comparison between private and public. Public institutions are significantly lower in costs. Private institutions, for instance, like USC, it's about $60,000 for tuition, so huge price difference, right? But one thing to keep in mind is public universities do not accept as many endowments or people donating generous donations of money. Whereas private schools, they accept a lot of endowments from former alum, people that want to donate to the university. So what does that mean in terms of money, right? Because privates have a lot of endowment money, they're able to give more full ride tuition scholarships, more grant opportunities at private schools, whereas public schools, they only really give what the state and federal is willing to give the student. And there are certain programs that help, but the reason I share this is because oftentimes I hear students say, oh, I'm not going to apply to private, it's way too expensive for my family. And my advice to that is, even if it's expensive for your family, I would still encourage you to apply, because the school has a lot of money that they want to give to have you come to their school. So don't shut that door, because I've seen students get into Stanford, USC, and also get into UC Berkeley, and Stanford and USC were going to cost them less than going to Berkeley. So, because of the scholarship money that they got. In terms of academics, public schools have more major and minor options, whereas privates, because they're smaller campuses and they tend to focus on specific subjects, they have less minor and major options. Yeah. Concord University? Yes. Or Concordia? Yeah, in Irvine. Is it good? It's not a bad school. It depends what your goals are, I think, is what I would say. If they're looking, because it is a small private school, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think they tend to be very focused on psychology. If that's the industry and field that you want to go into, I think it's fine. But if you're really more interested in other industries and other fields, I would explore more colleges. I wouldn't limit myself to Concordia. In terms of diversity, public schools tend to have more in-state diversity. Why? Because they have to admit a certain percentage of students from the state of California. Because why? California pays for these schools to operate. Private schools, on the other hand, more nationwide diversity, more international diversity, because we're not bound to the state, so we can accept as many kids from New York as we want, or as many kids from China that we want, right? Because we're not bound to these rules. Public schools, not religiously affiliated. Privates can be, they're not all. And then in terms of graduation rates, private schools do tend to have higher four-year graduation rates, but that's simply because private schools, you oftentimes are not running into an issue where you can't get into a general biology class, because they've accepted the number of students they can actually handle for the most part, whereas public schools, you may not be able to take a specific class for 2 quarters because it gets filled up right away. So that's why these graduation rates might look a little different, but on average, people are still graduating from public universities within 4 years. With the exception of engineering, really consider that a 5-year degree now. It typically takes 5 years. Community colleges, there are 116 in the state of California, open admission, anyone can go. You can transfer from a community college to a university with 60 units. which typically takes about 2 years to get. And in terms of transfer pathways, UCs, we have the 7-course pattern. CSU, we have the Golden 4. And you would work with your college, community college counselor to identify those classes and take them. All right. Tips for supporting your college students when they get there, or if you have them right now. Checking in on them, making sure that they're able to thrive in their school, that they're doing well, support them, trust them, be empathetic with them, encourage them to meet their goals and whatever that looks like. Some piece of advice too, because I see this a lot sometimes with families, is if your student is accepted to a really great college, even though it's not near your home, if it can make a difference for them later on, I highly encourage that you allow them and trust them to take that on. Because I've seen many situations where students get into really great colleges, but because their parents want them to stay closer to home, they go to those colleges, and as a result have some limiting opportunities. So I would say, don't limit them. I know it's hard to be away from them, but just something that I think could also help support your student as well. Financial aid, I'll briefly just touch on this. So this is an example. I know this is like way out for many people, but here's an example of like prices at the very top of how much tuition usually costs. Registration fees and tuition, books and supplies, room and board, depending on where you're going, transportation, personal expenses, and on average the totals. So obviously they vary. As you can see, community college being the cheapest and privates being some of the most expensive. And this is just the total. This doesn't consider the money you've received, right? This is just the total. Now, in terms of your COA, or cost of attendance, this is what financial aid is looking for. This is how we determine how much money the state should give you, or the federal government should give you. So first thing that we do is, as I mentioned here, that total, we get that total cost. And then we subtract your expected family contribution, also known as the EFC, and this is the amount of money your family can contribute to your college education. After we subtract that, we get a number. If your number is 0 or your number is closer to 0, that determines that you need maximum eligibility for financial aid, and these are the individuals that are getting their tuition, fully covered in terms of state aid, federal aid. Now, if your number is really high, we see it as, okay, family can contribute a lot of money, they don't need financial aid, so you will pay out of pocket. So the lower the EFC, more money you get, the higher the EFC, less money, if not, no money you'll get. But in every situation, you will get, the money you will get even if you don't qualify for aid is loans. So, yes, unfortunately. It's a great investment in the sense where, like, okay, you save that money, it makes money for you to put them through college. But yes, in terms of when it comes time to apply for financial aid, they're going to ask for all that information, and they're like, oh, well, you have $100,000 saved for them for college, so tuition only costs $20,000. You don't need any money. So yeah, that will come into play. This is true. So for financial aid, so we have the ones that you want to exhaust first always are your grants. This is free money. This is money that you do not need to repay. This is the money that you will oftentimes get from financial aid. They're called grants. No money repayment, all yours to keep. Scholarships. This is a second thing you want to exhaust, which can be merit or performance-based, and this is money that does not require to be repaid. It can go towards your college. And as I mentioned, CEF has a scholarship that you could also use towards that, so that's an example. Next thing you want to exhaust is work study. So this is where a student works on campus, and in exchange for them working, they get money that can go back to their tuition. Or they can take the money in their pocket, but this is a form in which is considered financial aid and will be part of that financial aid package. And then the last thing is federal loans. This, if you don't have to take it out, try to avoid it, of course. I will say though, just because a school offers you $20,000 in loans and you need some of that money, but you only really need $10,000, only accept $10,000. You do not have to accept the full 20, because those interest rates will add up and you will be paying a lot more than what you took out. So if you can avoid loans, you avoid them. If you cannot, that's okay, but to only take what you need. All right. That is all I have for today. Any questions? Yes. So the way in which you won't know what you're eligible for until you apply for it, but you won't be able to apply until you're applying to colleges. And once you do that, that is when they'll tell you how much you can actually qualify for. And the thing is too, depending on your tax information, which may change from year to year, they use the most recent 2 years. So for this cycle, they're using the last 2 years to determine someone's eligibility. So it does change. So when you're ready, or do you have a student in college right now? Oh, you do, okay. Have you applied for FAFSA? Yeah. So they won't get their financial aid package until they're admitted into the school. After they're admitted, usually maybe a couple weeks after, they'll say, hey, we're gonna send you a financial aid package, and it lists everything. It says, okay, this is a cost, this is how much you'll get from the state, federal, work study, and then loans, and then this is the total. So I would ask your child, where is the financial aid package summary? If they don't know, have them log in to see if they can find it, because they should have one, so as long as they applied for FAFSA. If they did not apply for FAFSA, though, there is no financial aid package. Scholarships. So scholarships don't come in that package typically. What will happen is if the university has scholarships that they think the student's eligible for, they may say, hey, separately, they'll say, hey, you're eligible for these if you want to apply. Or also there's scholarships from numerous foundations, numerous companies, where if you apply, you get that money and then you put it towards your tuition. So you would manually subtract that. They don't automatically populate in that. Mm-hmm. 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 Oh, so, mm, what grade is she in right now? But like second year, third year? Second year. So one thing that I would suggest that she does is she can look on her university website. They usually have a scholarship page. So to look there first to see what she qualifies for, most colleges will offer like a continuing student scholarship award. And so as long as she meets the requirements and applies, they'll review it, they determine who they choose, but at least to go through that process, she can do that. Also though, there are scholarships, like I said, with companies, large organizations that offer scholarships that she could apply for, but she has to meet the qualifications. And I know some of them have specific qualifications. Must be a woman in STEM, must be, in your second year of college, or they may have specific requirements. I will say though, with scholarships, it's not one of those things where there's one website and everything's there. It's usually not like that. It takes a lot of searching. We compile like a list every so often that we try to share. I'm happy to share that. But it's not by any means exhaustive of what's out there. I know there's plenty more out there. So that's what you should probably look into. But yeah, you can always talk to your financial aid office and ask them for scholarships. But just going there, asking them, they have something, but they don't tell the entire school on purpose, because if you really wanted it, you would look for it. That's the idea with a lot of colleges, unfortunately. So, yeah. Any other questions, though? Good. Okay, I have one small favor, actually. If I could ask if you're able to scan that QR code and just sign in. I'm sorry, I meant to ask this in the beginning. But the reason we do this is just so we have your information and we can send you relevant emails, and you can get in contact with us if you do have any other questions or need anything else. But thank you so much, everyone. If you need my number, my email, I'm happy to share that too, to talk further. No, thank you. Thank you for sitting through. I know we covered a lot of topics and not nearly as in-depth as I usually like, but that's the purpose for today at least. And in the fall, we always come to, and we talk specifically about college admission, if that's something anyone's ever interested in too during the season.